Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, September 16th, 2025. All right, I hope everybody had a good weekend. I had a nice long one, and I want to start today by reminding everyone that we are fundraising at antiwar.com. We have not yet reached our goal. We had a really strong start. Things kind of slowed down for a bit, so we still could use some help here. So if you like this show, if you appreciate our work at antiwar.com, and you have the means, please go to antiwar.com/donate to see the different ways that you could help us out. Our goal is $100,000, and we started off with $50,000 in matching funds, and right now we're just getting up to $80,000 all together. So still a bit to go. So if you can help us out, we really, really appreciate it. All right, so to get back into the news here, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. bombs another boat near Venezuela. So the U.S. military on Monday bombed a boat near Venezuela and killed 3 people, according to a statement released by President Trump on Truth Social. President Trump again claimed without providing any evidence that the boat was carrying drugs and that the 3 people who were killed were narco-terrorists. He made similar claims about the first U.S. military strike on a boat near Venezuela that occurred on September 2nd, which he said killed 11 narco-terrorists. The president also posted a video that purported to show the Monday strike. It showed what appeared to be a boat that was drifting at sea, followed by an explosion. So in the video, it doesn't look like the boat is underway. There's no wash from the propeller or anything. It's just kind of sitting in the water, rolling over some waves, and then it explodes the moment that we assume that a U.S. airstrike hit the boat. So this is from Trump's statement. He said, quote, "This morning on my orders, U.S. military forces conducted a second kinetic strike against positively identified extraordinarily violent drug trafficking cartels and narco-terrorists in the Southcom area of responsibility. The strike occurred while these confirmed narco-terrorists from Venezuela were in international waters transporting illegal narcotics, a deadly weapon poisoning Americans headed to the U.S., end quote. So again, he made all these claims without providing any sort of evidence, no interdiction, no stopping the boat, searching it, arresting the people, just blowing it out of the water. And this comes after the Venezuelan government said over the weekend that personnel from a U.S. warship in the Southern Caribbean boarded a Venezuelan tuna boat that was in Venezuelan waters. Venezuela's foreign minister, Ivan Gil, said 18 armed U.S. troops were on the vessel for 8 hours, a claim that has not been confirmed by the U.S. military. Gil said, quote, "Those who give the order to carry out such provocations are seeking an incident that would justify a military escalation in the Caribbean," end quote. And what he's saying there, again, he's talking about this boat being boarded. But I do think that a big purpose of this deployment, bombing these boats, all this rhetoric, these escalations, is that they are trying to provoke Venezuela to respond, and then they have their pretext for war, for bombing Venezuela. I thought maybe, if you remember, about a week or two ago, some Venezuelan F-16s, or so they claim, flew over a U.S. Navy warship. I thought they might use that as the pretext, but it seems like anything really is going to go here. And I think a big part of this, especially the first strike on the boat, is setting a pretext here, establishing that this is going to become a regular thing in the region. And of course, Trump and other U.S. officials claim that this is about drug trafficking. But I think it's pretty clear that there's another agenda at play here, considering, if you look at the data, and even in Trump's statement, he kind of alludes to overdose deaths in the United States. But we all know that the overdose deaths are primarily caused by fentanyl and opiates. And that doesn't come from Venezuela. It just doesn't. It comes through pretty much all of it comes through Mexico. And so the claims about Venezuela is about cocaine trafficking, and cocaine does go through the Caribbean, but the majority that ends up in the U.S. goes through the Pacific. Yet this is where they're deploying the warships. This is where they're bombing the boats. Just happens to be right off the coast of the country that the current U.S. Secretary of State has wanted regime change in for many years, a country that the first Trump administration attempted to back a coup in, and failed, and imposed all these sanctions on. So I think there's obviously a different agenda at play here. And this is largely being driven by Marco Rubio. He's very much behind all of this. And Maduro, the Venezuelan president, has kind of been focusing his criticism on Rubio. He called him on Monday. He said Rubio was a lord of death and war. So it's kind of interesting. His rhetoric has been aimed at Rubio. And Maduro has made clear that he's very willing to work with the Trump administration on deportations and would, whatever else it would take to get sanctions relief. The Trump administration did give Venezuela some sanctions relief. They allowed Chevron to start pumping oil again, and that happened pretty recently. So there's been kind of mixed messages here. But I do believe that this is a push toward taking military action actually inside Venezuela. All right, so the next one here, Pentagon barred senior House staffers from briefing on boat strikes. So this article is from Nick Turse at The Intercept. So the Department of War is thwarting congressional oversight of the Trump administration's attack on a boat off the coast of Venezuela earlier this month. On Monday afternoon, as the full details of the first drone strike remain secret, Trump announced that U.S. forces conducted a second attack, which we just covered. So the legal justification and against the alleged narco-terrorists is being kept secret from senior congressional staffers. Last Tuesday, senior staff from House leadership and relevant committees were barred by the Office of the Secretary of War from attending a briefing on the first attack. According to 3 government sources who spoke on the condition of anonymity, the military cited alternative compensatory control measures. Sorry, I'm not speaking well today. The term for enhanced security procedures designed to keep information under wraps as the reason. So they're keeping their claims about this boat a secret. The War Department has attempted to conceal numerous details about the attack that killed 11 people in the Caribbean, including the fact that the vessel altered its course and appeared to have turned back toward shore prior to the strikes. Men on board were said to have survived an initial strike, The Intercept reported last week. They were then killed shortly after in a follow-up attack. So not sure. Again, we don't really know any details, but they're not sharing the evidence they claim to have about what was on these boats, who was on these boats, keeping everything a secret. And this has really been a pattern of this Trump administration when it comes to war. Just the lack of transparency and lack of sharing information. And, Trump has no problem with bombing a country like Iran, Yemen, now boats in Venezuela without any sort of congressional authorization. All right, so the next one here, Rubio says diplomacy for Gaza may not be possible. So speaking alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem on Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that a diplomatic solution for Gaza may not be possible. And these comments come amid this horrific slaughter that's happening in Gaza and the assault on Gaza City, which is all being supported, funded, enabled by the U.S. government. So Rubio blamed the lack of a deal on Hamas, even though Israel just bombed Hamas officials in Qatar, which is the country that's mediating the ceasefire talks, and Hamas said that the officials were meeting to discuss a ceasefire proposal, so they bombed them during negotiations. Yet Rubio stands in Jerusalem and says there's no dealing with Hamas there. I'll read his quote in a minute, but essentially his message is, there's no dealing with Hamas. They're crazy. We can't do diplomacy with them, when Israel just bombed the mediating country. And Israeli media has also reported that Netanyahu has thwarted a potential ceasefire deal at least 7 times. And Israeli media, Israeli officials have been very clear in the nearly 2 years that this has been going on, that Netanyahu has been the main impediment to ceasefire deals. So this is what Rubio said. He said, quote, "We have to remember who we're dealing with here, and that is a group of people that have dedicated their lives to violence and barbarism," end quote. So he's talking, to clarify, he's talking about Hamas there. I know that sentence could certainly apply to the Israeli government as well. So Rubio said, quote, "And when you're confronting that hard reality, as much as we may wish that there be a sort of peaceful diplomatic way to end it, and we'll continue to explore and be dedicated to it, we also have to be prepared for the possibility that's not going to happen," end quote. So Rubio offered no criticism of the of the Israeli bombing of Qatar during the ceasefire negotiations. When he was asked about the strikes, Rubio said, quote, "We are focused on what happens now, what happens next, what role could Qatar play possibly in reaching an outcome here that leads not just to the end of this hostility, not to the release of all the hostages, both living and deceased, not just the disarmament and elimination of Hamas, but also a better future for the people of Gaza, which is not possible as long as Hamas exists," end quote. So what he's doing there is backing Netanyahu's goal of eradicating Hamas. So a day earlier, Rubio visited the Western Wall in the old city of Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem, and Netanyahu spoke to reporters and said, the U.S.-Israel relationship is as strong as these stones in this wall. And that's the picture here of Netanyahu and Rubio at the Western Wall. All right, the next one here, Israeli forces kill more than 50 Palestinians in Gaza. So Israeli forces killed more than 50 people in Gaza on Monday, medical sources told Al Jazeera, as the IDF continues its destruction campaign in Gaza City and launches attacks in other parts of the Strip. Out of the 51 people reported killed, at least 36 died in Gaza City, where the IDF has been conducting an offensive that has displaced about 300,000 people. That's the latest estimate. That's what the Israeli military is claiming, that 300,000 people have fled the city since they started the offensive. Kyle Anzalone covered that for us on Sunday. And another 10, so you had at least 36 killed in Gaza City. That number is probably higher now because they've been really ramping up the attacks. And now, according to the Israeli military, they've begun their major ground offensive to actually completely take over Gaza City. So it's just escalating and escalating. Another 10 Palestinians were killed while attempting to get aid in other parts of Gaza. So the areas where they're telling them to flee, they're still killing Palestinians who are trying to get food. Israeli strikes on Monday included the destruction of the Al Gvir high-rise tower in western Gaza City. That's the picture you see here of them completely destroying this huge residential building. And the Israeli military has destroyed dozens of high-rise towers in recent weeks. They've destroyed probably at this point thousands of buildings in Gaza City since early August. As you know, it's just important to stress that their plans for Gaza City involve taking it over, removing all the Palestinians, and leveling every single building to the ground. And there was Israeli strikes on tents in Gaza City. One of the people who were killed on Monday was Mohammed al-Kufi, who was a local journalist, so another journalist killed by the IDF. The pictures and videos that I saw, lots of children among the casualties, some really horrific things. And the IDF offensive in Gaza City comes amid famine in the area, an Israeli-imposed famine. And another 3 starvation deaths were recorded on Monday. The Gaza Health Ministry said that it has recorded a total of 425 malnutrition, famine deaths so far. So that number continues to rise. All right, so the next one here, Gvir calls for a luxury neighborhood for Israeli police in Gaza. So Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said on Monday that he wanted to build a luxurious neighborhood for Israeli police on the ruins of Gaza, and repeated his calls for the settlement of Jews and the expulsion of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. This was reported by the Times of Israel. So Ben-Gvir, he said this at a speech he gave at the National Police Academy in Israel. He said that Israel will finish the mission, occupy Gaza, and that he wants to establish a neighborhood of police officers on Gaza's coast, which he said would include high-rise buildings. He said, quote, "The time has come to settle Jewish settlement. The time has come to encourage voluntary immigration. The time has come to bring the death penalty for terrorists, end quote. So voluntary migration, of course, is a term that Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, and other Israeli officials use when they're talking about their ultimate goal of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Gaza, which we know is very clear is their ultimate goal. Are they going to be able to pull it off is another question. And last year, Ben Gvir, he's a West Bank settler himself, he's about as bad as you get in Israel, openly supportive of Baruch Goldstein, the terrorist who killed Palestinian civilians at a mosque years ago. And Ben Gvir, just this stuff. This isn't even that bad for him, the stuff that he said at this police conference thing. There's just so many examples of the horrific things that he said. But one thing he said last year was that he would be very happy to live in Gaza. So he has his eyes on the land there as well. All right, so the next one here, Trump spoke with Netanyahu before Qatar bombing. So this is based on a report from Axios from Barak Ravid, who is he's actually former Israeli intelligence himself. And this is citing Israeli sources. But I think this is probably true. I find this whole narrative that Trump wasn't aware that Israel was going to bomb Qatar and that he kind of just went with it and was just a little critical of it. I'm just haven't been buying it. And according to these officials, not only was Trump aware of it, Netanyahu actually called him and told him about it beforehand, and that they're saying that he had time to stop it if he wanted to. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu informed President Trump that Israel planned to launch airstrikes against Hamas officials in Qatar shortly before the attack took place, and Trump did not oppose the plan. Again, this was reported by Axios on Monday. In the wake of the Israeli bombing of Qatar, a major non-NATO ally of the U.S., the White House claimed that by the time it learned about Israel's plans to strike Doha, it was too late to stop it. They essentially said the planes were already in the air. Trump himself also claimed that he was not notified about Israel's plans and that he was very unhappy about the attack. The Israeli officials speaking to Axios said that Netanyahu did inform Trump of his plans relatively late in the game. There was still time for the strikes to be called off. 3 Israeli officials said that Netanyahu notified Trump at about 8 a.m. Washington, D.C. time, and that the strikes hit Doha at 8:51 a.m., so nearly an hour later. One official said, quote, Trump knew about the strike before the missiles were launched. First, there was a discussion on the political level between Netanyahu and Trump, and afterwards through military channels. Trump didn't say no, end quote. A second senior Israeli official said that if Trump had wanted to stop it, he could have, and that in practice he did not. Both officials claim that if the U.S. opposed the attack, Israel would have called it off. The claims from senior Israeli officials align with Israeli media reports from that day. As I mentioned, there was one from the Jerusalem Post that again cited Israeli officials that said the U.S. had given Israel a green light to go ahead with the bombing, which killed 5 lower-level Hamas officials and 1 Qatari security officer. So there's also a report from Middle East Eye, and that cited U.S. and regional officials that said Trump had blessed Israel's attack on Doha. So that's from U.S. sources as well, not just Israeli sources. So Israeli officials speaking to Axios said that Israel had decided to go along with the U.S. claims that it was not informed about the plan to strike Doha. They essentially said, once we saw them saying that, we decided to go along with it. And then after the bombing, Netanyahu released a statement claiming that the airstrikes were a wholly independent Israeli operation, that Israel initiated it, conducted it, and Israel takes full responsibility. So very weak. Again, it just makes Trump look so weak because either based on the U.S. narrative, what they've been putting out there, either they're just lying or they just have no control over Israel and they're not going to impose any consequences on them, even though they're claiming that they're not happy that they did this. Again, I think it's clear that Trump just went along. The idea that he wasn't aware before this happened, I've found very hard to believe. And again, you see Rubio went over there. I did mention it, I think, when I read that story. He didn't criticize them bombing Qatar. He just said, we're going to look to the future, to what Qatar could do in the future. No reason to dwell on what already happened. So, very strong show of support from the U.S. Secretary of State after this bombing that supposedly the U.S. was not happy about. All right, so the next one here, Persian Gulf states to activate joint defense mechanism. This article is from Middle East Eye. So Gulf leaders on Monday said that they would convene the Gulf Cooperation Council's GCC joint defense body for a meeting after Qatar called for a concrete response to Israel's attack on Doha last week. The leaders of the GCC were among more than 50 from Muslim and Arab nations who gathered in Qatar, where Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani gave a forceful speech criticizing the blatant, treacherous, and cowardly Israeli attack on Hamas political officials. Thani called on his counterparts to take concrete steps to address, what's happened here. And in response, the GCC, a body representing the 6 Gulf countries, issued a statement condemning the brutal Israeli aggression against the sisterly state of Qatar, which it called a direct threat to joint Gulf security and to regional peace and stability. The GCC agreed to call a meeting of the Joint Defense Council and hire a military committee. The committees will said that they will assess the defense posture of the member states and the sources of threat in light of the Israeli aggression. So essentially, they're going to meet and talk about it, the GCC Defense Committee. A lot of words, a lot of forceful statements from the Arab countries, but no sign that they're taking any sort of action. Though some of them are saying they're reevaluating, the ones that do have diplomatic ties with Israel, those are being reevaluated. We will see if there's any, if this leads to any sort of action against Israel, whether in the diplomatic sense or I would be very surprised if these countries took military action against Israel, but maybe they'll take a firmer stance saying that if we're attacked again, then we will respond or something like that. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon kill 2. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So Israel continued with its drone strikes on southern Lebanon over the weekend, killing at least 2 people in separate strikes on Sunday and Monday morning. The Sunday strike was in Nabatea, while on Monday another vehicle was hit in Yatir. The Nabatea strike killed 1 person in the southern town of Callaway. The IDF issued a statement Monday claiming that the person was Mohammed Ali Yassin, and they claim that he was involved in weapons development for Hezbollah, which is what they always claim. No confirmation from the Lebanese side if that was true. But just Israel continues to flagrantly violate this. I shouldn't even put it in those terms anymore, that they're violating a ceasefire deal. The deal has been dead for a while, but still there's been no attacks from Lebanon against Israel from Hezbollah or anything like that. So they're keeping their end of the bargain, I guess. All right, so the next one here, parliamentary elections in Syria do not allow citizens to vote. So this article is from The Cradle. So Syria is set to hold parliamentary elections on September 15th. So this was on Monday. It was supposed to start. I think it might have been delayed, but it's supposed to continue. The process will continue through the week. But this is not going to be democracy. Citizens are not voting. Regional electoral committees will select 140 seats out of Syria's 210-seat parliament, rather than citizens directly voting for members of parliament. The committees have been appointed by the Supreme Election Committee. The other 70 MPs are set to be selected personally by Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, the former al-Qaeda chief known previously as Abu Muhammad al-Julani. The Syrian government recently announced that elections will not include Suwaida Governorate, where thousands of Druze civilians were massacred by government forces during heavy fighting in the area in July. It also said that the Kurdish-controlled governance of Hassak and Raqqa will not be included, stressing that this was for security concerns, and Kurdish authorities have denounced the decision. So they're having an election that's not really an election. They're essentially, again, the electoral body. This is essentially, it seems like a parliament's going to be handpicked by this new HTS government that took power last year. All right, so the next one here, North Korea denounces U.S. nuclear war games. This one is from Kyle Anzalone. So Pyongyang issued a harsh statement condemning trilateral war games led by the U.S. So the U.S., Japan, and South Korea kicked off the Iron Mace and Freedom Edge military drills on Monday. And one of these drills, I believe it is the Iron Mace, includes nuclear war games simulating, what could potentially happen in the chance of a nuclear war. So this is the statement from the vice chairman of North Korea's Central Military Commission. He said, quote, "The reckless military moves of the U.S., Japan, and the ROK on the Korean Peninsula, the world's hottest spot, pose a grave challenge to the security interests of our state and a major danger of undermining regional stability and escalating military tensions. The U.S. and its allies are gradually undermining the security environment of the Korean Peninsula through the expansion of exclusive military blocs and consecutive war drills," end quote. And this is a trilateral thing that the U.S. has been pushing for, trying to settle the historical grievances South Korea has with Japan and trying to repair that relationship so they can increase military cooperation. And really, it's about China, but of course, North Korea is another factor in all of this. All right, so the next one here, Trump says deal to buy TikTok from China is close. So this is another one from Kyle, published at the Libertarian Institute. So I kind of forgot all about this whole TikTok saga, but President Trump is now saying that a deal for an American company to buy TikTok from ByteDance could be completed this week when he speaks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. Trump said, quote, "The big trade meeting in Europe between the United States of America and China has gone very well. It will be concluding shortly. A deal was also reached on a certain company that young people in our country very much wanted to save. They will be very happy. I will be speaking to President Xi on Friday," end quote. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent clarified that the framework of an agreement for TikTok had been reached. Beijing said that the two sides had reached a basic consensus on the deal. In March 2024, President Biden signed a bill that ordered TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance, to divest its shares from the company within 6 months or face an effective ban. And Trump extended the deadline. The deadline was January, but he has extended it multiple times now, allowing Americans to use TikTok while the agreement was negotiated. So essentially, it looks like an American company is going to be probably going to end up buying it. And really, and I mean, officials have said this. Kyle mentions it in the article. I remember there was a conversation between Mitt Romney and Tony Blinken at some think tank thing, essentially saying that it was the genocide in Gaza that led to this renewed push for a U.S. takeover of TikTok because of all the content, that did not portray Israel in a nice light on TikTok. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. bombs Somalia for the 77th time in 2025. So U.S. Africa Command has announced that its forces launched 2 more airstrikes in Somalia, bringing the total number of U.S. bombings in the country this year to 77, as the Trump administration continues the heavy air campaign, which gains virtually no media coverage in the U.S. One of the airstrikes AFRICOM announced was launched on September 10th in Somalia's northeast Puntland region, where the U.S. is backing local forces against an ISIS affiliate. The command offered no details about the strike, as they stopped reporting casualty estimates and assessments on civilian harm. So the U.S. They said they launched the strike on September 10th. On September 11th, the U.S.-backed Puntland forces put out a statement claiming that they conducted a clearance operation against ISIS and that they seized medical supplies that were kept in the hideouts in the remote Miscat Mountains. And they posted these pictures of their fighters, and these are apparently the people that the U.S. is backing in Puntland. They took pictures with medical supplies, like cheering that they took the medical supplies. It's kind of strange, but that's what they're saying that they captured in this attack. And they also claim that many ISIS fighters were killed. And they're always saying like, we're about to win, we're about to wipe them out, but the war just goes on. And then the other strike AFRICOM announced targeted al-Shabaab in the vicinity of Keel Dir in the Galgaduud region of central Somalia on September 12th. Again, AFRICOM did not offer any details. The U.S.-backed Somali government claimed that its forces repelled a major attack on this area on September 12th that was launched by al-Shabaab. They claim that more than 70 al-Shabaab militants were killed. It's unclear how many were killed by the U.S. airstrike. According to Garo Online, which is a Somali media outlet based in Puntland, at least seven Somali soldiers were killed in the battle. And the Garo report said that the battle came after government forces lost several strategic towns to al-Shabaab, and President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has come under growing criticism from opposition figures who say he's more focused on electoral disputes than the war. So the central government that the U.S. backs controls very little territory within Somalia, and they are very weak and have been losing a lot of support, but the U.S. has just really doubled down on helping prop them up by escalating these airstrikes. And Trump has completely shattered the previous record for annual U.S. airstrikes in Somalia, which he set at 63 back in 2019. This year, again, we're up to 77. I think we will probably get to about 100 if they continue at this pace. And I know I always say this, but like there's no other coverage of this. And I have, people have picked up my work on this, which I really appreciate. And, I've done a few interviews about it. But it's, it just when it comes to kind of the traditional media, I mean, there's really nothing. Once in a while, Stars and Stripes, they're like a military-focused media outlet. They'll have a story about, they're launching a lot of airstrikes in Somalia, but that's really it. I mean, nobody is really aware of this bombing campaign that just goes on. And it was the same way in the first Trump administration. All right, so the last story here, Warsaw seeks NATO backing for a Ukraine no-fly zone. So this article is from The Cradle. So on September 15th, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski called on NATO countries to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine following a reported Russian drone incursion into Poland last week. So if that name, Sikorski, sounds familiar, he was the one, I believe at the time he was a European member of parliament in the European Parliament. Now he's been Poland's foreign minister for a few years. But he was the one when the Nord Stream pipelines exploded. He posted a picture of it and said, "Thank you, USA." And then he ended up deleting it. But so essentially he's saying, no fly zone. We should start shooting down Russian drones and missiles inside Ukraine, which of course risks direct war with Russia, which could turn nuclear. So it's not a good idea. Not something that it's just another reason why this war just needs to end. Somebody's got to just make the decision to put the pressure on Ukraine to make the concessions that they need to make to end this thing. So Sikorski said, quote, "We as NATO and the EU could be capable of doing this, but it is not a decision that Poland can make alone. It can only be made with its allies. Protection for our population, for example, from falling debris, would naturally be greater if we could combat drones and other flying objects beyond our national territory. If Ukraine were to ask us to shoot them down over its territory, that would be advantageous for us. If you ask me personally, we should consider it," end quote. And I know this has been an idea floating around, like imposing a no-fly zone on Western Ukraine. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Roger D. Harris, Washington projects its drug problem onto Latin America. One from Ted Snyder, so much for the Nobel Peace Prize. One from Abu Bakr al-Shamahi, attacking Qatar shows Israel doesn't want a Gaza ceasefire. One from Gideon Levy, the general of bloodshed in the West Bank is Israel's moral face. And our spotlight from Harrison Berger, pro-Israel Palantir endangers our liberties. And Harrison, he interviewed me about Somalia, and they posted it on the Drop Site News YouTube channel, which is cool. So you could go watch that interview of me talking about Somalia with Harrison there. But that is it. That's everything for me for today. Again, please help us with our fundraiser if you can. All the usual stuff. Follow us on social media. Like, subscribe, and comment. Again, I hope everyone had a good weekend. It was nice. I took a Twitter break, 3 full days without being on Twitter, or X, I guess I should call it. I'm going to keep it off my phone. It was really good for my mental, just for my soul, for my mental well-being to just stop, not be scrolling all day. So, I really recharged my batteries, had a good time with my kid, and but I'm back at it now. But yeah, I'm definitely going to keep the X off the phone. If people want to contact me, because a lot of people DM me there, email is probably the best way, the quickest way I'll get back to you. But anyway, that is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.